An introduction. The courage to be a person accepting the challenge of maturity. June 28, 1964, Manly P. Hall.
What if I told you that someone predicted the crises we're facing in 2026 all the way back in the 1980s? Well, today, we're diving into the shockingly relevant ideas of philosopher Manly P. Hall. His lectures from over 30 years ago laid out a blueprint for our world that is, frankly, a little unnerving in its accuracy. Let's get into exactly what he had to say.
So Hall kicks things off with this really heavy warning, a line that feels like it could have been written 1,000 years ago or, yesterday. For each person, there must be a day of reckoning. I mean, that's a powerful statement. And that single idea, that's the foundation for his entire diagnosis of where our society was headed.
And that really brings us to the whole point of digging into this, right? What if that day of reckoning he was talking about? What if it's now? For us? And what if the warning signs, the entire blueprint for the crises we're living through, were laid out for us long before we ever got here?
Okay, so to really get what Hall was seeing, we've got to wrap our heads around his main diagnosis of society's self-destructive path. He summed it all up in this absolutely chilling phrase he coined, the high standard of dying.
And look, he wasn't just being poetic. When he said high standard of dying, he was pointing out something very specific. He saw society completely obsessed with economic progress and, just having more stuff. So obsessed that we were actively ignoring the fundamental laws of nature. His whole point was, when you start looking at the planet as just a big pile of resources to make money from, you're going to end up poisoning yourself. It's inevitable. We thought we were chasing a high standard of living, but what we were actually doing was getting really, really good at destroying ourselves.
He said all of life, all of it, is built on three simple foundational gifts. He called them bestowals, which is kind of an old-fashioned word, right? But what he meant is timeless. He's talking about the gifts from nature, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. The absolute basics. And his big warning was that our society was systematically corrupting all three.
So, first up, he went after the air. And you have to remember, this is back in the 1980s. Even then, he was looking at industrial pollution and seeing where it was all going. He used this incredible image. He said we'd corroded the air. We'd taken this thing that's supposed to give us life and turned it into an instrument of pain and sickness.
And this is where it gets crazy, right? This is the connection. Back then, he was talking about industrial byproducts causing things like allergies. Now, fast forward to today, to 2026, we're literally checking our phones for the air quality index. We're dealing with smoke from wildfires thousands of miles away. We see a huge global spike in respiratory problems. His warning wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. It was spot on. It's almost spooky.
Okay, next on his list was water, and he did not pull any punches here. He flat out said we were turning our entire water system, our rivers, our lakes, our oceans, into one great sewer. Just dumping all our industrial and chemical junk into it way faster than nature could ever clean up after us.
And again, this is where his warning gets terrifyingly real for us today. Back then, Hall was worried about, industrial chemicals in a general sense. But now? We're dealing with stuff he couldn't have even imagined. I'm talking about microplastics in our blood, forever chemicals like PFAS showing up in water all over the planet. The problem he saw didn't just disappear. It got way more complex. It evolved.
And finally, number 3, our food. He basically said our whole approach to nutrition was just wrong. Mistaken was his word. We were so obsessed with making food last longer on a shelf that we were pumping it full of all these chemicals. But here's the kicker. Those chemicals might preserve the food, but they sure as hell don't preserve the human body that's eating it. In fact, they often do the exact opposite.
All right, so let's dig a little deeper. Because for Manly P. Hall, all this stuff, the bad air, the bad water, the bad food, that wasn't the actual disease. Nope, that was just a symptom. The real problem, he said, was much deeper. It was a psychological issue baked into our entire culture.
I mean, it begs the question, right? Why on earth would any society that calls itself advanced knowingly poison its own life support systems? It just doesn't make sense. Well, Hall's answer was pretty simple. We weren't acting like a sane adult society at all. He had a name for it, perpetual adolescence. He basically saw our whole culture as a bunch of teenagers who refused to grow up, a society that would do anything to avoid personal responsibility. We wanted all the fun and gratification, but none of the consequences.
and we were more than happy to let someone else, the government, corporations, you name it, make the tough decisions for us.
And check this out. The consequences he predicted would come from this refusal to grow up, it's incredible. The list he laid out reads like a news headline from this week. Bad government, a huge rise in intolerance, people in power exploiting everyone else, a failure of self-discipline, and the big one, losing our personal rights and privileges because we couldn't be bothered to be responsible for ourselves. Sound familiar?
But here's the really crucial part, the catch. Hall warned that, we can pretend to live in this fantasy world where actions don't have consequences, but the universe doesn't play that game. He said, Nietzsche will never for one moment tolerate this perpetual adolescence. In other words, the laws of cause and effect don't care about our feelings. Eventually, reality was going to close in on us.
Okay, so after all that, you might be thinking Hall was just some prophet of doom. But he wasn't. After he laid out the problem and what was causing it, he also gave us a way out, a powerful antidote. But it requires us to completely change how we think about what a successful life even is.
And he put it so simply. He said true success has absolutely nothing to do with how much money you have or how comfortable you are. Real, genuine success is just the accomplishment of the necessary. That's it. Just doing what has to be done for a healthy, sustainable life. For you, for your family, for your community.
And this really lays out the choice he was talking about. It's so clear. On one side, you've got what he called the fun generation. It's all about instant gratification, right? Get rich, be comfortable, live it up now, even if it means rocking up a mountain of debt. But on the other side, you have the goal of the necessary, the grown-up goal. This is about long-term well-being. It's about things like integrity, friendship, and just having some peace.
He even had this amazing way of looking at our whole lives. Like we're all enrolled in a university. So from birth to about 25, that's just formal education, learning how to work. But then the real curriculum starts. From 25 to 60, you're in the school of life, and your job is to learn real values. And then from 60 onward, you graduate to the school of wisdom, where your job is to use everything you've learned to help the world around you.
So, this all brings us right back to the present, to the very heart of his message. What do these words from so long ago demand from us right here and right now, in 2026?
If you take one thing away from all this, it should probably be his idea about freedom. He said we have it completely backwards. We think freedom is the right to do whatever we feel like, whenever we feel like it, the teenager's version of freedom. But Hall said no, that's not it at all. Real freedom is freedom from your own worst habits. Freedom from your compulsions, your addictions, your excesses. It's the freedom that only comes from self-discipline. So in the end, Hall's message isn't really about despair. It's actually incredibly empowering, because he was clear. Maturity, the antidote to this whole mess, isn't something that just happens to you when you get older. It is a conscious choice that you have to make. And so his philosophy, from all those decades ago, leaves us with one last critical question. He warned us that nature is closing in, that a day of reckoning is here. So the question for you, for me, for all of us is, what are we going to choose to build in response?